When walking onto a Civil War battlefield, a quiet reverence settles over you. These now peaceful rolling hills and open fields once roared with the chaos of battle. As you step forward and trace the paths where soldiers once marched, you can almost hear the echoes of battle. The distant thud of cannon fire, the sharp crack of musket shots, and the muffled cries of the soldiers. Faint whispers seem to rise with the wind, carrying stories of bravery, fear, and sacrifice. The ground feels heavy with history, each step a reminder that this tranquil place was once the stage for a struggle that would shape a nation. The Battle of Kennesaw Mountain's dead angle was a scene of horrific carnage. In an effort to better understand this battle, we will relive it through two first-hand accounts. One from Private Samuel Watkins of the 1st Tennessee Infantry, and the other, Sergeant Nixon Stewart of the 52nd Ohio. In late June of 1864, the progress of Major General William T. Sherman's Atlanta campaign had slowed down. Confederate General Joseph E. Johnston had established a strong defensive line on Kennesaw Mountain, just outside of Marietta, Georgia. It was a significant obstacle standing between Sherman's army of 100,000 and Atlanta. On June 27th of 1864, Sherman would launch his assault. The Battle of Kennesaw Mountain opened with Union artillery shelling Confederate defenses, followed by a frontal ground assault. At the center of this attack was Sergeant Nixon Stewart of the 52nd Ohio. His brigade, under the command of Colonel Daniel McCook, would be leading the assault right into the teeth of the Confederate defenses. Opposing Sergeant Nixon was Private Samuel Watkins of the 1st Tennessee Infantry.
As the sun began to mount toward the zenith, everything became quiet, and no sound was heard save a peckerwood on a neighboring tree tapping on its old trunk, trying to find a worm for his dinner. We all knew it was but the dead calm that precedes the storm. On the distant hills we could plainly see officers dashing about hither and thither, and the stars and stripes moving to and fro, and we knew the Federals were making preparations for the mighty contest. We could hear the rumbling sound of heavy guns and the distant tread of a marching army, as a faint roar of the coming storm, which was soon to break the ominous silence with the sound of conflict, such as was scarcely ever before heard on this earth.
At 8 o'clock, we moved rapidly to position in rear of our main works. A general attack all along the lines had been ordered as a diversion in favor of the main assault. The 2nd Brigade of our division, Colonel John G. Mitchell commanding, was on our right. The rebel line was almost in the shape of a fishhook on what is now known as Cheatham's Hill, or the Dead Angle. The charge was made on Cheatham's division, composed of Vaughan's, Maney's, and Strahl's brigades. We were to strike the circular bend of the works or the lower end of the fishhook. Just as the battery ceased firing, we dressed our lines into column, and Colonel Dan McCook, standing in front of the brigade, repeated from Macaulay's poem in Horatius.
Then out spoke brave Horatius, the captain of the gate. To every man upon this earth death cometh soon or late, and how can man die better than facing fearful odds for the ashes of his fathers and the temples of his gods?
Fire! It seemed that the archangel of death stood and looked on with outstretched wings while all the earth was silent, when all at once 100 guns from the Federal line opened upon us, and for more than an hour they poured their solid and chain shot, grape and shrapnel right upon this point defended by our regiment alone.
We moved promptly on signal, going at quick time, then double quick on coming to the creek, which was marshy and sluggish. Our lines were somewhat broken. Firing began immediately, but we pushed on, capturing the line of rifle pits, taking the men prisoners.
All of a sudden, our pickets jumped into our works and reported the Yankees advancing, and almost at the same time, a solid line of blue coats came up the hill.
Union troops surged forward in tightly packed ranks, their bayonets glinting dully in the early morning haze. The open field before them quickly turned into a killing ground. Confederate rifle and cannon fire ripped through the air, shredding the Union lines. Shells bursting overhead, showering the blue-clad soldiers with hot iron, while mini-balls thudded into flesh.
The batteries opened right and left as we pushed on up the hill. It is dreadful to think about. Grape and canister shot and shell sowed the ground with rugged iron and garnished it with the dead. The first to fall was Sergeant John T. Fowler of Company B. As he fell, his tongue protruded from his mouth, caused by a contraction of the muscles in his throat. I longed to take him in my arms and minister to his sufferings, but we were to push for battle.
I discharged my gun, and happening to look up, there was the beautiful flag of the Stars and Stripes flaunting right in my face, and I heard John Branch of the Rock City Guards, commanded by Captain W.D. Kelly, who were next to Company H, say,
"Look at that Yankee flag. Shoot that fellow. Snatch that flag out of his hand."
My pen is unable to describe the scene of carnage and death that ensued in the next 2 hours.
The race of flags grew every moment more terrible. 4 color bearers were either killed or wounded. Lindley H. Street, a brave boy beloved by his comrades, fell, pierced to death. Sergeant W.M.J. Bradford snatches the flag and is wounded in the strong right arm as he leads the charging column. Poor boy. He goes back to Nashville to die with the dread gangrene. David U. McCullough of Company E seizes the old banner and is wounded in the shoulder. Thus, 3 of our color bearers are shot down. The line wavers like a great billow, and up comes the banner again. Now it is in the hands of James Lynn of Company C. He loses an arm, and on we go. Our brave men are climbing steadily on upward still.
Men stumbled and fell in waves, their bodies littering the slope. When the Union soldiers reached within yards of the Confederate earthworks, they found themselves caught in a deadly crossfire. The Confederates had fortified the dead angle with an ingenious design, creating overlapping fields of fire that mowed down attackers like wheat before a scythe.
Our brave Dan McCook was in the lead when our front line had reached the fortifications, only to find a barrier which was calculated to make a weak man falter and a brave man think. The works were fringed with pikes, sharpened pins driven into logs, standing like a hayrack, pointing toward your face. 4 lines of these stood one behind the other, so arranged that they overlapped each other. In a moment, the front line grasped the barrier of pikes and carried them endways, thus opening the way to the line of earthworks.
Column after column of Federal soldiers were crowded upon that line, but no sooner would a regiment mount our works than they were shot down or surrendered. Still the Yankees came. It seemed impossible to check the onslaught, but every man was true to his trust and seemed to think that at that moment the whole responsibility of the Confederate government was rested upon his shoulders. I have heard men say that if they ever killed a Yankee during the war, they were not aware of it. I am satisfied that on this memorable day, every man in our regiment killed from 20 to 100 each. All that was necessary was to load and shoot. In fact, I will ever think that the reason they did not capture our works was the impossibility of their living men passing over the bodies of their dead. The ground was piled up with one solid mass of dead and wounded Yankees.
Our brave colonel, urging his men on, was struck as he said, "Come on, boys, the day is won," as he reached the earthwork. He was shot about 4 inches below the collarbone in the right breast, falling outside of the fortifications. Colonel Harmon of the 125th Illinois took command. He gave the command, "Forward," and fell into the arms of his men, pierced through the heart. Deadly volleys mowed us down. The ground was strewn with the dead and dying. The living crouched behind the dead comrades. Colonel Dilwar of the 85th Illinois was now the ranking officer, and no sooner in command than he was wounded, and the command was assumed by Lieutenant Colonel J.W. Langley.
I had just discharged the contents of my gun into the bosoms of 2 men, one right behind the other, killing them both, and was reloading when a Yankee rushed upon me, having me at a disadvantage, and said, "You have killed my 2 brothers, and now I've got you." Everything I had ever done rushed through my mind. I heard the roar and felt the flash of fire and saw my more than friend, William A. Hughes, grab the muzzle of the gun, receiving the whole contents in his hand and arm and mortally wounding him. He died for me, and saving my life, he lost his own.
By 10 a.m., the Union attack had become disorganized, and men began to fall back. Union soldiers resorted to digging with their hands and bayonets, trying to scrape out shallow trenches for cover. But the Confederate defenders were unrelenting. For hours, the assault hung in bloody stalemate. Men from both sides hurled insults and gunfire across the narrow gap now separating them.
The order had been given to fall back 20 paces and thus straighten our lines, which had swung to the right and rear. When the order was given to reform our lines, we had lain down right under the enemy's works, and every one of us would have been killed or captured had it not been that the line formed 25 yards below us with the advantage of the depression of the slope. 3 of my comrades were struck just as our men lay down. Joseph Hanlon lay dead on my right. Isaac Winters, who was shot in the temple but living, lay within reach on the left. Frank Grace of Company D lay dead just below me, and Joseph E. Watkins of the 22nd Indiana Regiment rose to start for the line below when he fell dead across my feet as I lay near a chestnut stump. Night came, we were glad of it. Our canteens were empty, so were our cartridge boxes. An hour after dark, they rolled cotton balls and turpentine and threw them over, setting the dry twigs and leaves on fire, burning and charring our dead. The cries of some who were wounded and not dead was horrifying to us.
On the third morning, the Yankees raised a white flag, asked an armistice to bury their dead, not for any respect either army had for the dead, but to get rid of the sickening stench. During the whole day, both armies were hard at work, burying the Federal dead. When the Yankees fell back and the firing ceased, I never saw so many broken down and exhausted men in my life. There was not a single man in the company who was not wounded or had holes shot through his hat and clothing.
Our loss in the 52nd was 34 killed and 102 wounded and 3 prisoners, total 139. The loss in the brigade was 419.
As the hours wore on, the futility of the attack became undeniable. The assault on the dead angle had failed. For the Confederates, it was a rare and resounding victory in Sherman's otherwise relentless campaign. For the Union, it was a grim reminder of the cost of war and the futile nature of frontal assaults. Kennesaw Mountain was not Sherman's first large-scale frontal assault of the war, but it was his last. On July 2nd of 1864, Sherman maneuvered a force around Johnson's left flank, forcing the Confederates to fall back once again closer to Atlanta.